He gave it to me with love, but she never used me. And no one ever knew why. I was made to shine. I was crafted with care, with small, delicate stones set on a thin white gold chain, designed to rest gently on the skin of someone special. I was placed in a velvet-lined box, with her name engraved on the small card attached with a ribbon. I existed because of her. I was chosen, set apart, wrapped in care and meaning. I was a gift of love. And yet, she never used me. From day one, I remained untouched. My box was opened with trembling hands, teary eyes, and a smile that never quite formed. She looked at me with tenderness, yes, but also with a pain that seemed ancient, as if something inside her said, "This can't be." After that, I was put away in the back of a drawer. And there I stayed. For years. Every now and then, she would take me out of the box. She would touch me with her fingers as if touching a memory that still burns. Never with anger, but also never with enough courage to put me around her neck. As if the simple act of dressing me would open a door that she tried to keep closed at all costs. The first time it happened, I sensed there was something bigger behind the refusal. It wasn't just any disinterest. It was a secret, a pain hidden beneath layers of silence, like letters that were never sent. She was young, she had eyes that seemed to dream and flee at the same time. And there was a name that she repeated in her mind, even without pronouncing it. His name. The man who gave me to her. I remember the moment I was given to her. She was sitting at a small table in a garden. She was dressed in blue, and the wind seemed to know something that neither of them were saying. He opened the little box and offered it to her with a smile full of hesitation and hope. And he said something like, "I wanted you to have something of mine." She didn't answer with words. She just looked at him. And in that look there was an entire universe. Love, fear, doubt, and a goodbye already beginning to be born. She accepted the gift, but not the gesture. Because the gesture said, "Stay." And her heart said, "I can't." That night, she came home in silence. She came into the room, sat on the edge of the bed, and looked at me as if I were to blame for something. I, so young, so pure, so full of intention. And yet, I was the symbol of a love she could not live. And that's how my life began. Not as an ornament, not as an adornment of beauty, but as a hastily saved memory. A precious silence. A story that no one has ever told. Until now. Because I remember, and if I could speak, I would tell everything. They met on a normal afternoon, like so many others that go unnoticed. But on that one, time seemed to slow down. She had her hair tied up in a messy way, a folder in her hands, and that distracted look of someone who lives on the outside but keeps the whole world inside. He was sitting on a bench, waiting for a meeting to start, leafing through a book that he had clearly read many times. Their eyes met by chance. But what happened after that was never by chance. He was the first to smile. A small, shy smile, the kind that doesn't force you to get close, but rather invites you in gently. She smiled back, almost without realizing it. She sat down 2 seats away. Silence. Then he talked about the book. She told him about the author. And within a few minutes, they were talking about everything except the reason they were there. It wasn't a movie romance. There was no background music, no rehearsed phrases. But there was one thing that no soundtrack could create: comfort. They understood each other in the rhythm of their breathing. They laughed at the same details. They had the kind of conversation that doesn't seek to convince, just to accompany. It was natural. It was inevitable. For weeks, they met again and again. Sometimes in the building's cafe. Other times during breaks between meetings. He always noticed when she tucked her hair behind her ear. She noticed how he fidgeted with his watch when he was nervous. Small gestures that only those who really pay attention notice. And they looked at each other like that, like someone reading a well-written page. There was a growing tenderness between them, the kind that doesn't require haste. They didn't talk about feelings, but the silence between one sentence and another said more than any statement. When they were together, the world seemed lighter. And when they were apart, All it took was remembering their last smile for the day to gain a little more color. It was at that time that he decided to buy me. He chose carefully after days of looking at shop windows. He wanted something that would suit her, not in appearance, but in essence. He wanted something delicate, light, discreet, but with presence. Something like her. He brought it to me in a small box, wrapped in velvet, with slightly trembling hands. He didn't know how he would deliver it. He only knew that he needed it. Because sometimes, we feel that something precious is being born, and we want to immortalize that moment before it disappears. That afternoon, he invited her to a coffee outside of her routine. He chose a quiet bakery with large windows and the smell of fresh bread. They sat near a shelf with dried flowers. He took his time delivering the gift. She took her time asking, until he took the little box out of his pocket, placed it on the table with a restrained, almost childish gesture, and simply said, "It's for you." No reason, no pressure. Just because it reminds me of you. She opened it, looked at me, and in that instant, I felt it. I felt that her world stopped inside. Her eyes sparkled for a second, but they didn't get wet. Her mouth formed a smile, but it didn't last long. She said, "Thank you," as if to say, "I wanted to, but I can't." She closed the box slowly. She touched his hand but didn't hold it. He realized he didn't say anything else. The conversation changed subject. The coffee got cold and what was began to fall silent. That night, he returned home with silence between his fingers. And I, kept in the box, understood that it had been the gift of a love that could not happen. A few days had passed since the cafe where I was delivered. The atmosphere between them was no longer the same. There was still affection, there was still that kind of comfortable silence that only two compatible souls can share. But now, there was also a space between their gazes. A hesitation that hadn't existed before. Something that he perhaps couldn't explain, but that she felt all the time. And I, even hidden in the darkness of a drawer, could feel it vibrating in the air like an anticipated absence. She continued to meet him. Their encounters were shorter, more restrained. Smiles came, but with a delay. Their hands almost touched, but they pulled back. And in her eyes, there was something more now. A divided, heavy look, like someone who was in love, but already knew that it couldn't go on. Sometimes, she seemed to want to say something. She would start a sentence, sigh, change the subject. He understood, of course, but he chose not to force it. He waited, with the same patience of someone waiting for something to blossom that has not yet fully revealed itself. It was on a Sunday afternoon that everything began to unfold. She had returned from the neighboring city, where she had spent the weekend. She entered the room, placed her bag on the bed, and sat down slowly. Then she opened the drawer where I was. She stared at me for several minutes. She touched my necklace gently, as if I were carrying guilt or relief, I can't be sure. And then she whispered, "Forgive me. It wasn't for me. It was for him. And for herself." That night, she didn't sleep. She paced back and forth, checking her phone, deleting messages, writing new ones. She was consumed by an internal conflict that was now overflowing. And then she sat down at her desk and began to write. Not a letter, but almost a confession. The words came with force, with truth. And it was there, in those lines, that everything finally revealed itself. She was in a relationship. It wasn't just a simple relationship. It was an engagement. A promise made years ago, sustained by families, silent agreements and expectations that didn't completely belong to her. The man she was in a relationship with was a good, honest man, admirable in appearance, respected by everyone. But not by her. What they had was a social construct, something that seemed right on the outside, but on the inside, it was empty. Did he love her? Maybe. But she never felt for him what she felt for that other man. The man who truly saw her. The love she experienced in the last few weeks was like a ray of light in a room locked from the inside. A reminder of what could be. Of what she could be if she hadn't chosen, or been led to choose, safer, more accepted, more expected paths. That necklace she received, that I am, represented more than a gift. I was the door to a life she didn't allow herself to open. The next day, she met him again. They didn't make an appointment. They just met in the same place as always. When she saw him, she smiled, and in her eyes, there was a beautiful, almost light sadness. He knew. Even before she said anything, he knew. They sat down. They talked about the weather, the city, books. Then she took a deep breath. She touched the pocket of her bag where she carried my little box. But she didn't take it out. She just said, "I'm sorry. I wish I had been stronger." He didn't ask why. He didn't insist. He just looked at her like someone who understands that time doesn't always cooperate with the heart. And he said, "You were enough for me, even though I couldn't stay." She smiled with full eyes, held his hand for a moment, and then stood up. That was their last meeting. That night, she carefully removed me from her purse. She opened the box and looked at me as if she were saying goodbye to a version of herself. She touched each part of my chain, ran her fingers over the stones, and for a second, she almost put me on. She even reached around my neck, but then pulled back. She put me away again. And with a whisper of suppressed pain, she said, "I can't wear you, because you remind me of the life I didn't choose to live." And that's how I became a secret, a reliquary of a love interrupted. A symbol of what could have been, but wasn't. And even without having touched your skin, I was closer to your soul than any jewel ever was. After she said goodbye, everything became quieter. The house, the room, the days. There was a calm that wasn't peace. It was more like a kind of mourning that doesn't announce itself. A silence that doesn't scream, but weighs heavily. Her steps around the house slowed. Her laughter with her friends seemed more forced. And when she was alone, it was like she was in two places at once, the present she chose and the past she refused. She kept me in a higher drawer, behind old papers and memories that no one else looked for. It wasn't forgetfulness. It was an attempt at survival. Because there are things that we don't forget, we just learn not to look at them so often. And I, even there, locked away, felt when she passed by. The way I hesitated when opening the drawer. The way her fingers trembled when touching the envelopes. And the eyes that almost turned to me, but stopped halfway. She went ahead with the engagement. The families got together, the preparations began. Everything seemed to be going well. Flowers had been chosen, dates had been set, decisions had been made about the dishes and photographs. But deep down, she already knew that this path was not hers. Not entirely. It was like walking down a beautiful road, surrounded by praise and applause, but feeling that her soul had stopped there, sitting in that coffee shop, in front of a gaze that truly saw her. In the months that followed, she changed. Not in any visible way, but from within. She became quieter, more reserved, more practical. She stopped listening to the music she liked. She avoided the places where he might be. Not out of contempt, but out of protection. She knew she couldn't allow even a fraction of hope to remain. And even though her heart sometimes escaped in memories, reason soon pulled it back to the place it couldn't leave. One day, she received a letter from him. It arrived discreetly, with no clear sender. She opened it with trembling hands. She read every word with wet eyes and a full chest. He didn't ask for anything. He didn't make any promises. He just said that, despite everything, he was grateful to have met her. And that, even though it didn't end, what they had experienced was not in vain. She kept the letter with me. She wrapped both things in a piece of soft fabric and put us in a smaller box, as if sealing a chapter that she didn't want to lose but also couldn't revisit. Time passed, she got married, smiled in the photos, followed the rituals. She did what was expected of her. And, in a way, she found a way to live. Not everything was pain. There were real moments of joy. There was affection. There was respect. But there was also that empty space, that silent what if, that accompanied her like a soft shadow, silently, but always present. For entire nights, she would sit alone on the porch and stare at the sky. On those nights, she would think about him. She would wonder what he was doing, if he was also thinking about her, if he had already moved on. She never tried to look for him. She never answered his letter. But she never forgot him. Because true love, even when interrupted, remains whole within us. And I, kept for so many years, was never forgotten. I was never discarded. I was the only thing she never had the courage to wear or to give away. Because more than a necklace, I was a link. A symbol. The materialization of a moment she chose not to live, but that, even so, lived inside her forever. Years had passed. So many that they were no longer measured in seasons, but in internal changes. She walked differently now. Her steps were more confident, her eyes calmer. It was as if she had accepted certain absences and learned to live with them as if they were a natural part of the landscape of the soul. I didn't look back as much anymore, but I also didn't pretend that nothing had happened. She had made peace with her own history. I was still there, kept in the same little box, now inside a newer drawer, in a different house, with walls that told different stories. But she still touched me from time to time. She would take me out of the cloth that wrapped me, look at me for a few seconds, take a deep breath, and then put me back where I belonged. As if, in that simple gesture, she was remembering everything and, at the same time, letting it all go. And then, one day, without planning it, she saw him. It was in a small bookstore, in the city center. She went in to escape the rain. He was already there, leafing through a blue-covered book. She recognized him immediately. The way he held the book, the way he tilted his head to read, everything was there intact. But there was something new too. An air of serenity. A hair with a few gray strands. A slight weariness in his shoulders, perhaps. Or maybe it was just life, which he had passed on to both of them, without asking permission. She hesitated. She thought about leaving before he saw her. But she stayed. Maybe because, deep down, she knew that running away no longer made sense. And in the next moment, he looked up and saw her. There was no surprise. Just a smile. One of those that says it all, even when the words don't come. He approached slowly, and they greeted each other like old friends who had lost each other but never stopped remembering each other. They talked for a few minutes. They talked about work, children, books, the city. Everything with the lightness of someone who no longer expects anything, but feels a lot. Neither of them asked about what was left behind. Neither of them apologized. Because it was no longer necessary. They were different. And at the same time, there was still something in them that hadn't changed. A knowing look, a comfortable silence. A longing that no longer hurt, it just lived there, tenderly. Before they said goodbye, he touched the necklace she wore around her neck. It wasn't me. It was someone else. Simpler, perhaps. Or just less loaded with memories. He smiled, looked into her eyes, and said, "You're fine." She smiled back and said, "I'm at peace." And in that moment, the necklace kept for so many years, knew that my story was coming to an end. That night she came home, opened the drawer, and took me out of the box. For the first time in years, there was no pain when she touched me. She looked at me with a new affection, no longer with sadness, but with gratitude. And then, with a gesture that seemed light and yet final, she untied the chain, put it around her neck, and wore me. She stood in front of the mirror for a few minutes. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She just looked at herself, as if she recognized something she had previously avoided. And for the first time, I touched her skin. I was used. Not as a symbol of forbidden love, but as a reminder of something that helped her become who she is. Not as a burden, but as a liberation. That night, she slept with the windows open and the necklace on her chest. And I, after years in the dark, finally shone. Now that I've been used, I can rest. For years, I lived in the dark. In silence. In pause. Each stone of mine carried a dormant glow, like a memory that insists on existing even when everyone tries to forget. I saw time pass slowly. I saw love turn into absence, and absence turn into acceptance. I was not forgotten. I was just left aside, until the right time. I wasn't just a necklace. I was the memory of a love that couldn't blossom, but that taught her soul to look within. I was the reflection of what was kept, not out of weakness, but out of wisdom. Because sometimes, loving is also knowing how to stop. And there are silent courages that hurt more than screaming. When she put me around her neck that night, I didn't feel pride. I felt peace. I wasn't an ornament. I was a symbol. She wore me not out of longing, but out of liberation. She no longer carried the pain of having given up on what she felt. She now carried the understanding that every choice she made, no matter how difficult, shaped the woman she became. I was a gift from a man who truly loved her, and who she loved back. Even if it was silent, even if it was for a short time, and even if she had to leave him behind. But you see, some loves don't have to last to be eternal. They just have to be true. She went on with her life. She had joys and pains, victories and falls, lights and shadows. And I remained there as a silent witness to it all. I was not forgotten. I was respected, as if she knew that what I represented was too important to be used on impulse. I was expected, and when I finally touched her skin, I was accepted. Completely. Now, maybe I'll go back to the drawer. Maybe I'll be used again, or just put away. It doesn't matter. Because I'm no longer the necklace of a story that was interrupted. I'm the necklace of a woman who forgave herself, who healed herself, and who learned that love, sometimes, manifests itself only to remind us of who we are. If I could speak, I would say that I was more than a gift. I was a pause in time, I was the silence that taught, I was the memory that stopped hurting, and today, I am just gratitude.